I stood frozen in the doorway of our family's kitchen, watching my sister Maya clutch the lottery ticket I'd deliberately given her the wrong numbers for. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows caught the malicious gleam in her eyes as she waved the worthless piece of paper in the air like a trophy. Her laughter still echoed in my ears from 3 days ago when I'd accidentally mixed up the digits, a sound that had haunted me through 2 lifetimes. God, Lila, you're pathetic, Maya sneered, not bothering to look up from her phone, where she was probably texting her friends about her brilliant correction of my supposed mistake. I can't believe you actually thought those random numbers would win anything. Thank God I'm here to fix your messes as usual. She held up the ticket she'd rewritten in her precise, controlling handwriting, the same handwriting that had forged my signature on scholarship applications in my previous life, the same hands that had literally pushed me to my death. Now those manicured fingers gripped what she believed was a winning ticket worth $87 million, the largest jackpot in our state's history. But I knew better. I remembered everything from my previous life, every betrayal, every stolen opportunity, every moment of calculated cruelty that had led to my murder. And I remembered the real winning numbers that would be drawn tonight: 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball 18. The numbers I'd carefully written on my own ticket, the one hidden safely in my bedroom beneath a loose floorboard Maya would never think to check. The memory of my death still burned fresh in my mind, even 8 months after being reborn into my 17-year-old body with all my memories intact. Maya had pushed me down the marble staircase of our family mansion the night before my 18th birthday, the night before I was supposed to officially inherit our grandmother's vast estate. In my original life, I'd died believing it was a tragic accident, never suspecting that my own sister had murdered me in cold blood for money. But when I'd somehow woken up in the past, reliving the months leading up to my death, I'd remembered the truth. I'd seen the look in Maya's eyes as she'd stood at the top of those stairs, the cold calculation as she'd weighed her options, the moment of decision when she'd chosen money over her sister's life. I'd heard her whisper finally as I'd tumbled to my death thinking no one would ever know. She'd been wrong about that. Maya had always been our mother's golden child, despite being 2 years younger than me. While I was bookish and introverted, Maya was everything our parents valued: beautiful, charismatic, socially adept, and utterly ruthless in pursuing what she wanted. She had inherited our father's business acumen and our mother's stunning looks, creating a combination that made her irresistible to everyone who met her, everyone except me, who had lived with her manipulation for 17 years. Our parents, David and Jennifer Chen, had built a fortune in commercial real estate, and they'd always made it clear that they expected their daughters to be equally successful. But while they'd pushed me to excel academically and professionally, they'd spoiled Maya rotten, excusing her increasingly cruel behavior as competitive spirit and natural leadership. They'd created a monster, and I'd been her primary victim. The pattern of abuse had started when we were very young. Maya had an uncanny ability to present herself as the innocent victim whenever adults were around, while tormenting me when we were alone. She'd destroyed my toys and blamed me for the damage, stolen my homework and claimed I'd copied from her, and systematically isolated me from potential friends by spreading vicious rumors about my supposed mental instability. As we'd grown older, her tactics had become more sophisticated and devastating. She'd intercepted letters from colleges, convincing our parents that I wasn't smart enough for higher education, despite my perfect grades. She'd hacked into my social media accounts and posted embarrassing content that destroyed my reputation at school. She'd seduced every boy I'd ever had a crush on, not because she wanted them, but because she couldn't stand the idea of me having something she didn't. But the cruelest betrayal had been her systematic theft of my relationship with our grandmother. Grandma Rose had been the only family member who truly loved and understood me, and she'd planned to leave me her entire estate, including her mansion, her art collection, and investments worth over $10 million. Maya had spent months poisoning our grandmother against me, claiming I was unstable and manipulative while positioning herself as the devoted granddaughter who truly deserved the inheritance. When Grandma Rose had died suddenly of a heart attack 6 months before my 18th birthday, I discovered that her will had been changed. Everything that should have been mine was now going to Maya, with only a small trust fund left for me. a trust fund that Maya would control as my guardian until I turned 25. I'd been devastated, but Maya had been triumphant. She'd already started making plans for her money, talking about the apartment she'd buy in Manhattan, the European vacation she'd take, the designer wardrobe she'd finally be able to afford. She'd made it clear that she intended to use every penny of the inheritance to fund her own dreams while keeping me financially dependent and under her control. But then I'd learned about the codicil. Grandma Rose had apparently had second thoughts about changing her will, and she'd added a secret provision that would transfer everything back to me if anything happened to prevent Maya from inheriting, such as Maya being convicted of a crime or declared mentally incompetent. More importantly, the codicil specified that if Maya died or disappeared before her 21st birthday, everything would go to me instead. I'd only discovered this because I'd accidentally overheard Maya on the phone with our family lawyer, demanding to know if there were any other surprises in the will. The lawyer had reluctantly explained the codicil, and I'd watched Maya's face go white with rage as she'd realized that her inheritance wasn't as secure as she'd thought. That night, she'd tried to kill me. I remembered every detail with crystal clarity now. Maya had invited me to celebrate my upcoming birthday with a family dinner, something that had never happened before in our contentious relationship. I'd been so desperate for approval and acceptance that I'd believed her sudden display of sisterly affection, never suspecting the trap she was laying. After dinner, as I'd walked upstairs to my room, Maya had followed me to the second floor landing. She'd been uncharacteristically quiet all evening, and I'd finally worked up the courage to ask her what was wrong. "You know, Lila," she'd said, her voice deceptively casual, "I've been thinking about Grandma's will." "What about it?" I'd asked, pausing at the top of the stairs. "I think it's funny how she changed her mind at the last minute. Almost like someone convinced her that I was the better choice." Maya had stepped closer, and I'd seen something dangerous flickering in her eyes. "But I keep wondering, what would happen if you weren't around to cause problems?" "Maya, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you've always been in my way, always making things more complicated than they need to be, always making me look bad just by existing." Her voice had grown colder with each word. "Do you know how much easier my life would be if you just disappeared?" I'd started to back away, finally recognizing the threat, but it was too late. Maya's hands had connected with my chest, sending me tumbling backward down the unforgiving marble staircase. I'd felt my neck snap on the final step, and the last thing I'd seen was Maya's face peering down at me with satisfaction rather than horror. She'd waited a full minute to make sure I was dead before she'd started screaming for our parents, claiming she'd found me at the bottom of the stairs after hearing a crash. Our parents had been devastated. The police had ruled it an accidental death, and Maya had inherited everything exactly as she'd planned. But somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a second chance. I'd woken up on the morning of my 17th birthday, 8 months before my death, with all my memories of the future intact. At first, I'd thought it was just an incredibly vivid nightmare. But as the days had passed and everything had unfolded exactly as I remembered, I'd been forced to accept the impossible truth. I'd been reborn, given the opportunity to change my fate. The question was, what should I do with this knowledge? My first instinct had been to run away, to escape my toxic family and start fresh somewhere else. But where could a 17-year-old girl go with no money and no support system? Besides, running would mean letting Maya and my parents win again. It would mean allowing them to continue their pattern of abuse with no consequences, while I started over with nothing. No. This time, things would be different. This time, I would use every advantage at my disposal to ensure that Maya faced the consequences she'd escaped in my previous life. I'd spent months carefully planning my revenge, using my knowledge of future events to position myself strategically. I knew which stocks would rise and fall, which businesses would succeed or fail, which lottery numbers would win. But more importantly, I knew exactly how my family would try to destroy me, and I could prepare accordingly. The lottery had been the perfect opening move. I knew Maya couldn't resist the opportunity to humiliate me while potentially making herself rich. She'd always been greedy, always convinced that she deserved everything good that came into our family's orbit. When I'd accidentally given her the wrong numbers for tonight's record breaking jackpot drawing, she'd snatch them up immediately, convinced that I was too stupid to copy lottery numbers correctly from the newspaper. Honestly, Lila, she'd said 3 days ago, shaking her head with theatrical disappointment as she'd examined my deliberately incorrect transcription. It's honestly amazing that you can even dress yourself in the morning. These numbers aren't even close to the ones printed in the paper. Look, you wrote down 3, 11, 19, 28, 35 with Powerball 7, but the actual quick pick numbers from yesterday's drawing were completely different. She'd rewritten them carefully in her precise handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed fraudulent documents in my previous life. 15, 22, 28, 34, 41 with Powerball 9. Numbers that looked more mathematical and strategic to her analytical mind, numbers that would lose spectacularly while I held the real winning combination hidden safely away. There, she'd said with satisfaction, tucking the corrected ticket into her designer purse. At least one of us has a chance of actually winning something. Though, honestly, even with the right numbers, you'd probably find a way to mess up claiming the prize. But the lottery was just the beginning of a much more elaborate plan. I had 8 months of future knowledge to work with, and I intended to use every single day to systematically destroy Maya's life while building my own power base. The first phase had already begun. Using my knowledge of market fluctuations, I'd convinced our housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, to let me help her invest her small savings in certain stocks that I knew would skyrocket over the next few months. She'd been hesitant at first, but when the first investment had tripled in value within 2 weeks, she'd started listening to my advice more seriously. Mrs. Rodriguez had worked for our family for 15 years, and she'd witnessed Maya's cruelty firsthand. She'd always been kind to me, sneaking me extra desserts when Maya had convinced our parents to put me on restrictive diets, and quietly cleaning up the messes Maya had created in my room during her more violent tantrums. Now, as her investments grew, she'd become my first ally. Someone with access to the house who was loyal to me rather than my parents or Maya. I'd also been carefully documenting every instance of Maya's manipulative behavior. In my previous life, I'd been too trusting and naive to keep records of her abuse. This time, I'd installed hidden cameras in common areas of our house, recorded phone conversations when possible, and kept detailed journals of every incident. Maya had no idea that her casual cruelty was being systematically cataloged for future use. But most importantly, I'd begun reaching out to people from my past life, people whose trust Maya had abused, whose lives she'd damaged in her relentless pursuit of success. I knew exactly where to find them and exactly what she'd done to them because I'd witnessed the aftermath in my previous timeline. There was Jennifer Walsh, Maya's former best friend from high school, whom Maya had betrayed by sleeping with Jennifer's boyfriend on prom night and then claiming Jennifer had given her permission. There was Marcus Chen, our cousin, whose innovative app design Maya had stolen and presented as her own work to our father's venture capital firm. There was Professor Elizabeth Hart from the local university, whom Maya had falsely accused of sexual harassment when she'd received a failing grade in organic chemistry. One by one, I'd been planting seeds, providing them with information and resources to pursue justice against Maya. I couldn't tell them about my rebirth. They'd have thought I was insane. Instead, I'd positioned myself as a concerned family member who'd discovered evidence of Maya's wrongdoing and wanted to make things right. The results had been slow but steady. Jennifer Walsh had started asking questions about that night, reaching out to mutual friends who'd witnessed Maya's behavior. Marcus had begun investigating the theft of his intellectual property with the help of lawyers I'd anonymously funded. Professor Hart had learned about Maya's pattern of false accusations against authority figures who'd challenged her. As Maya's past misdeeds had begun catching up with her, our parents had initially tried to rally around their golden child, convinced that she was being unfairly targeted by jealous rivals. But the evidence had been accumulating steadily, and even they'd started to have doubts about some of Maya's more outrageous claims. "This is ridiculous," Maya had complained to our mother just last week, after receiving a formal inquiry from the university about her accusations against Professor Hart. "Why are all these people suddenly coming after me? It's like there's some kind of conspiracy to make me look bad." "Maybe people are just tired of covering for you," I'd suggested innocently from my seat at the breakfast table. Maybe they've finally decided that your actions should have consequences. Maya had shot me a venomous look, but she hadn't been able to argue with the logic. After all, she'd spent years burning bridges and making enemies, confident that her beauty and charm would always protect her from retaliation. She'd never considered that those same victims might eventually find the courage to fight back. Now, 3 days after the lottery ticket incident, I stood in our kitchen watching Maya prepare for what she believed would be her triumphant moment. She'd spent the intervening time telling everyone who would listen about her brilliant correction of my mistakes, setting herself up for the most public humiliation possible. She'd called her friends, posted on social media, and even given an interview to the local newspaper about her mathematical approach to lottery number selection. She'd positioned herself as the smart, analytical sister who'd saved our family from my incompetence, making sure that as many people as possible would witness her defeat. I can't wait for tonight's drawing, Maya said now, not bothering to look up from her phone where she was probably arranging some kind of victory celebration. Finally, someone in this family will have accomplished something worthwhile. Maybe now Dad will stop being disappointed in both his daughters. I bit back my immediate response, reminding myself that patience was key to my larger plan. Tonight's lottery drawing would be satisfying, but it was merely the opening move in a much more comprehensive campaign of justice. I hope you win, I said instead, and I meant it, because Maya's victory would make her eventual downfall all the more devastating. The day passed slowly, with Maya growing increasingly excited as the evening approached. She'd invited several friends over to watch the drawing, turning it into a party where she could bask in anticipated glory. She'd even convinced our parents to attend, promising them a surprise that would make them proud. As 7 o'clock approached, our living room filled with Maya's carefully curated social circle wealthy classmates who admired her ruthless ambition. Older college students she'd charmed with her sophistication, and a few family friends who'd always favored her over me. Everyone was laughing and drinking champagne, treating the lottery drawing like a foregone conclusion. I sat quietly in the corner, ignored as usual, watching Maya hold court in the center of attention. She was wearing her most expensive outfit, her hair and makeup perfectly styled, every inch the successful young woman she'd always pretended to be. She'd positioned herself next to the large screen television, ready to accept congratulations the moment her numbers were called. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced as the lottery program began, "I present to you the difference between intelligence and luck. While some people just scribble down random numbers and hope for the best, others apply mathematical analysis and strategic thinking to maximize their chances of success." The crowd laughed appreciatively, and several people turned to look at me with poorly concealed pity. They all knew the story of how Maya had corrected my supposed mistakes, and they'd clearly been told that I was too embarrassed to attend my own sister's moment of triumph. "And now," said the television announcer, "tonight's winning Powerball numbers for the largest jackpot in state history, $87 million. The room fell silent as everyone focused on the screen. Maya clutched her ticket, her knuckles white with anticipation. I felt my heart racing, despite knowing exactly what was about to happen. Tonight's winning numbers are 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the Powerball number is 18. The silence stretched for several long seconds as Maya stared at her ticket in confusion. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, shock, and growing horror as the reality of her situation sank in. But, but these can't be right, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the continuing television broadcast. "I corrected the numbers. I fixed them. They were supposed to be—" She trailed off as one of her friends leaned over to look at her ticket. "Maya, honey, none of your numbers match, not even close." "That's impossible," Maya's voice cracked with panic. "I calculated these numbers carefully. I used statistical analysis and probability theory. These random numbers can't possibly be right." I stood up slowly, pulling my own ticket from my pocket. Every eye in the room turned to me as I compared my numbers to the ones displayed on the television screen. The silence was deafening as everyone realized what had happened. "Oh my God," breathed Jennifer Walsh, not Maya's former friend, but a different Jennifer who'd been invited to witness Maya's triumph. "Lila, are all your numbers?" "Every single one," I confirmed, unable to keep the smile from spreading across my face. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and Powerball 18, exactly as I wrote them down 3 days ago. The room exploded into chaos. Maya's friends crowded around me, desperate to see the winning ticket for themselves. Several people started taking photos and videos, documenting the moment for social media. Someone called the local news station, and within minutes, our living room was buzzing with excitement and congratulations. But Maya herself sat frozen in her chair, staring at her worthless ticket with an expression of absolute devastation. Her perfectly planned moment of triumph had turned into the most public humiliation of her life, witnessed by dozens of people who'd expected to celebrate her victory. "This doesn't make sense," she kept repeating, her voice growing more desperate with each iteration. "The numbers were wrong. I saw them myself. Lila copied them down incorrectly and I fixed them. I made them right." "You corrected them based on what you thought were mistakes," I said gently, addressing the room as much as Maya herself. "But they weren't mistakes. They were the right numbers all along." Our parents had been standing near the back of the room, and I could see the shock and confusion on their faces as they tried to process what had just happened. For the first time in my life, they were looking at me with something approaching respect rather than disappointment. "Lila," our father said slowly, "how did you know?" "Lucky guess," I replied with a shrug. "Sometimes the simplest approach is the best one." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of verification, media attention, and legal paperwork. News crews arrived to interview the teenage lottery winner, and I played my part perfectly. Humble, grateful, and just surprised enough to be believable. Maya's friends gradually drifted away as it became clear that the party was over, leaving her sitting alone while reporters focused entirely on me. But as satisfying as the lottery victory was, it represented only the first phase of my larger plan. The real work was just beginning. Over the following days, I used my newfound wealth and public profile strategically. First, I hired the best lawyers money could buy to ensure that my lottery winnings would be protected from any attempt by my family to claim control over them. I knew Maya and my parents would eventually try to argue that I was too young to handle such a large sum responsibly, but my legal team was already preparing countermeasures. Second, I began systematically investing in companies and properties that I knew would be profitable based on my knowledge of future events. Within weeks, my initial $87 million had grown to over $100 million through carefully timed stock purchases and real estate investments. The financial press started calling me a teenage investment prodigy, never suspecting that my success was based on literal foreknowledge rather than analytical genius. But most importantly, I accelerated my campaign against Maya's reputation and future prospects. With my new resources and public platform, I could pursue justice for her victims much more aggressively than before. Jennifer Walsh's case was the first to come to fruition. Using my connections and financial backing, I'd helped her hire a top-tier legal team to pursue defamation charges against Maya for the lies she'd spread about Jennifer's supposed permission for Maya to sleep with her boyfriend. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, social media posts, and witness testimony that proved Maya had deliberately destroyed Jennifer's relationship and reputation for sport. The lawsuit made local headlines, especially when it was revealed that the defendant was the sister of the recent lottery winner. Maya tried to claim that the timing was suspicious, suggesting that I was somehow behind the legal action, but she couldn't prove any connection between Jennifer and me. Marcus Chen's intellectual property case followed shortly after. With proper legal representation, he was able to demonstrate that Maya had stolen his app design and presented it to our father's venture capital firm as her own work. The stolen app had generated significant profits for the investment company, and Marcus was entitled to substantial damages. But the most devastating blow came from Professor Elizabeth Hart's case. The university's investigation into Maya's harassment allegations had uncovered a pattern of false accusations stretching back years. Other students came forward with similar stories of Maya fabricating misconduct claims against professors who'd given her poor grades or refused to give her special treatment. The Academic Integrity Board not only cleared Professor Hart of all charges, but also recommended that Maya be expelled from her early enrollment program at the university. Her transcript was flagged with a notation about academic dishonesty, effectively ending her chances of admission to any prestigious college. As Maya's world began to crumble around her, Our parents finally started to see through the facade she'd maintained for so long. The evidence of her misconduct was overwhelming, and even their favoritism couldn't blind them to the reality of what their daughter had become. "I don't understand how this happened," our mother said one evening as we sat in the family room, the news playing footage of Maya leaving the courthouse after another legal hearing. "She was such a bright, ambitious girl. How did she become so cruel?" "She didn't become cruel," I replied quietly. "She always was cruel. You just chose not to see it because she was successful and beautiful and popular. You mistook her manipulation for intelligence and her cruelty for strength." Our father looked up from his tablet where he'd been reading yet another article about Maya's legal troubles. "Are you saying this is our fault?" "I'm saying that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. Maya has been showing you her true nature for years, but you kept making excuses for her because she reflected well on the family image." The conversation was interrupted by Maya herself storming into the room, her face flushed with anger and desperation. She'd just returned from another meeting with her lawyer, and judging by her expression, the news hadn't been good. "This is all your fault," she snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Ever since you won that stupid lottery, everything in my life has gone wrong. You've been sabotaging me somehow, and I'm going to prove it." I looked at my sister with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. She was still beautiful, still charismatic when she wanted to be, but the mask of perfection was finally slipping. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling, and she couldn't understand why her usual manipulation tactics weren't working. "I'm not sabotaging you, Maya," I said calmly. "I'm just not protecting you anymore." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that for our entire lives, I have been covering for you without even realizing it. Taking blame for things you did, keeping your secrets, making excuses for your behavior. I have been so desperate for family approval that I enabled your worst impulses by never holding you accountable." Our parents exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing some truth in my words. "But I'm done with that now," I continued. "I'm not going to lie for you or cover for you or pretend that your cruelty is somehow justified. For the first time in your life, you're facing the natural consequences of your own actions and you don't know how to handle it." Maya's face twisted with rage. "You think you're so superior now that you have money? You think that changes who you fundamentally are? You're still the same pathetic, worthless loser you've always been. Nobody will ever choose you over me, no matter how much money you have." The words should have hurt. In my previous life, they would have devastated me completely. But now, with the knowledge of what she'd ultimately done to me and the satisfaction of watching her empire collapse, they felt powerless. "Maybe you're right," I said, standing up from my chair. "Maybe I am pathetic and worthless, but at least I'm not a murderer." The comment hit like a physical blow. Maya's face went white, and I could see genuine fear flickering in her eyes for the first time since my rebirth. Our parents looked confused by the seemingly random accusation, but Maya understood exactly what I meant. "You're crazy," she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You're having some kind of breakdown." Am I? Or am I just finally remembering things clearly for the first time? I walked out of the room before she could respond, leaving her to contemplate the implications of my words. I could hear our parents asking her what I'd meant, but I didn't stay to listen to her explanations. I had more important things to do. The final phase of my plan was approaching, the anniversary of my death. In exactly 2 weeks, Maya would make her last desperate attempt to salvage her future by ensuring that I never lived to inherit Grandma Rose's estate. But this time, I would be ready. I'd already moved out of our family home using my lottery winnings to purchase a beautiful penthouse apartment downtown. I'd also hired a discreet security firm to provide round-the-clock protection, knowing that Maya's desperation was growing dangerous as her options dwindled. More importantly, I'd been laying groundwork for the ultimate trap. Maya had always been predictable in her cruelty, following the same patterns of manipulation and violence that had defined her entire life. I knew exactly how she would try to eliminate me because she'd already succeeded once before. The phone call came exactly when I'd expected it, 2 days before the anniversary of my original death. Maya's voice was sweet and conciliatory, the tone she always used when she wanted something important. Lila, sweetheart, I know we've had our differences lately, but you're still my sister. I've been thinking about how badly I've treated you over the years, and I want to make things right between us. It was almost word for word the same speech she'd given me in my previous life, the bait that had lured me to my death. That's very thoughtful of you, Maya, I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. What did you have in mind? I was thinking we could have dinner together, just the two of us, like old times, before everything got so complicated. I want to apologize properly for my behavior and maybe start rebuilding our relationship. And where would you like to have this dinner? Well, I thought it would be nice to do it at home, in the family dining room, somewhere private where we can really talk honestly without any outside interference. I almost laughed at the transparency of her trap. The family dining room was on the second floor of our mansion, directly adjacent to the marble staircase where she'd murdered me before. She was planning to use the exact same method, confident that I'd never suspect her of such violence. That sounds lovely, I said. What time should I come over? How about 8 o'clock tomorrow night? I'll cook your favorite meal myself. Remember how I used to make you pasta carbonara when we were kids? This was a complete fabrication. Maya had never cooked for me in her life, and pasta carbonara wasn't even my favorite dish. But she was trying to create a false narrative of sisterly affection that would make my accidental death seem more tragic and unexpected. I'll be there, I promised. Just like old times. Perfect. And Lila, thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful that you're willing to try. The false sincerity in her voice was almost impressive. If I hadn't known her true nature and intentions, I might have been genuinely moved by her apparent remorse. After ending the call, I immediately contacted my security team and my lawyers. Tomorrow night would be Maya's final attempt to eliminate me, but this time the outcome would be very different. This time, I would be the one setting the trap. The next evening arrived with appropriate drama, a thunderstorm that seemed to echo the violence brewing within our family mansion. I arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, wearing a carefully chosen outfit that looked casual but concealed multiple recording devices and a GPS tracker that would alert my security team if I was in danger. Maya met me at the front door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, dressed elegantly as if this were a special occasion rather than a premeditated murder. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance, probably planning to play the grieving sister to perfection once my body was discovered. Lila, I'm so glad you came. I was worried you might change your mind. She embraced me warmly, and I forced myself not to flinch away from the touch of my future killer. Come on, dinner's almost ready. The dining room had been set for two, with candles and flowers creating an atmosphere of intimate sisterly bonding. Maya had indeed prepared pasta carbonara, though I suspected she'd had it catered rather than cooking it herself. She'd also opened a bottle of expensive wine, probably hoping to impair my reflexes before the main event. This is beautiful, I said, taking my seat at the table. You've really outdone yourself. I wanted tonight to be special. We have so much to talk about, so many things to work through. Maya poured wine for both of us, her movements graceful and practiced. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our relationship lately, especially since your lottery win. I realize I've been jealous and petty, and I want to change that. What brought on this sudden insight? Honestly, watching you handle your success so gracefully. You could have been vindictive or cruel after winning all that money, but instead you've been generous and mature. It made me realize how badly I've been behaving. The lies flowed so smoothly that I almost admired her technique. If I hadn't known her true nature, I might have been completely convinced by her performance. We made small talk through dinner, with Maya playing the role of contrite sister to perfection. She asked about my investment portfolio, my philanthropic plans, and my future goals, all while subtly steering the conversation toward topics that would make good quotes for newspaper interviews after my death. I'm so proud of how you've handled everything, she said as we finished our meal. Honestly, I think you're a much better person than I am. You always have been. That's very kind of you to say. It's true. And I want you to know that no matter what happens in the future, I'll always regret the way I treated you. I hope someday you can forgive me for being such a terrible sister. The words were clearly meant as her final statement before my murder. a touching sentiment that would be quoted in her interviews with sympathetic reporters. She was already crafting the narrative of the tragic accident that would soon befall her beloved sister. Maya, I said gently, is there something you want to tell me? Her smile faltered slightly, and I caught a glimpse of calculation behind her eyes. What do you mean? I mean that you seem to be saying goodbye rather than hello, almost like you don't expect to see me again after tonight. Don't be silly, this is just the beginning of our new relationship as sisters. But her voice lacked conviction, and her hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her wine glass. Is it? Because the last time you invited me to a family dinner like this, you murdered me. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Maya's face went completely white, and her wine glass slipped from her nerveless fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. What did you just say? She whispered. I said you murdered me. 8 months ago, in my previous life, right here in this house, on the night before my 18th birthday. You pushed me down the marble staircase and watched me die, then pretended to find my body and screamed for help. Maya was shaking now, her composed facade completely shattered. That's impossible. You're having some kind of psychotic break. That never happened. Didn't it? Because I remember every detail. I remember you following me upstairs after dinner. I remember you asking what would happen if I just disappeared. I remember the feel of your hands on my back as you pushed me over the edge. You're insane. You're completely delusional. Maybe. Or maybe I got a second chance, and this time I'm not going to let you win. I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording app that had been running throughout our conversation. Every word you've said tonight has been recorded and transmitted to my lawyers, including your apology and your obvious attempts to create a false narrative of sisterly reconciliation. Maya lunged for the phone, but I was ready for her. I stood up quickly, backing away from the table toward the staircase where she'd planned to kill me. You were going to do it again, weren't you? I said, continuing to record as she advanced on me with murder in her eyes. You were going to push me down those same stairs, claim it was another tragic accident, and inherit everything just like you did before. I don't know what game you're playing, but it's over, Maya snarled, dropping all pretense of sisterly affection. You've destroyed everything in my life with your lies and manipulation. My engagement, my academic career, my reputation, all gone because of you. All gone because of your own actions. I didn't force you to steal Marcus's app design or make false accusations against Professor Hart. I didn't make you sleep with Jennifer's boyfriend, or forge documents, or commit fraud. You did all of that yourself. And I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. She was almost within arm's reach now, her hands extended as if to push me again, including finishing what should have happened months ago. But this time, I was ready. As Maya reached for me, I stepped aside and let her momentum carry her forward. She stumbled off balance, and I grabbed her wrist to prevent her from falling down the stairs herself. I might have wanted justice, but I wasn't a murderer like she was. Careful, I said, steadying her against the banister. We wouldn't want you to have an accident. That's when the front door burst open and my security team poured in, followed closely by police officers who'd been monitoring the situation from outside. The entire evening had been recorded from multiple angles, and Maya's confession had been captured in crystal clear audio. Maya Chen, said the lead detective, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Maya's wrists, I saw the exact moment when she realized that her life was truly over. All her beauty, all her charm, all her manipulation skills, none of it mattered anymore. She'd finally been caught, and there would be no escape this time. This isn't over, she hissed as the officers led her away. I'll find a way to make you pay for this. Actually, I said, it is over, completely and permanently over. The trial that followed was a media sensation. Maya's confession had been recorded from multiple sources, and the evidence of her previous crimes created a pattern that left no doubt about her guilt. She was convicted on charges ranging from attempted murder to fraud to academic misconduct, and sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Our parents were devastated, finally forced to confront the reality of what their golden child had become. They'd enabled a monster through years of favoritism and excuse making, and now they had to live with the consequences of their choices. How did we get it so wrong? Our mother asked me one day as we sat in the visiting room of the psychiatric facility where she was receiving treatment for depression. How did we fail to see what she really was? You saw what you wanted to see, I replied gently. Maya was beautiful and successful and reflected well on the family image. It was easier to believe that she was perfect than to acknowledge that she was cruel. Can you ever forgive us? I considered the question seriously. In my previous life, I desperately wanted their love and approval, willing to endure any amount of abuse and neglect for even the smallest crumb of affection. But now, having experienced the full extent of what their favoritism had enabled, I found that their validation mattered much less than I'd expected. I can forgive you, I said finally, but I can't forget. And I can't pretend that our relationship will ever be what it should have been. She nodded sadly, understanding that some damage couldn't be repaired. As for me, I used my wealth and knowledge to build the life I'd always wanted, but never thought I deserved. I established a foundation that helped young people escape abusive family situations, providing them with resources and support that I'd never had. I returned to school, determined to earn the education that Maya had stolen from me in my previous life. I surrounded myself with people who valued kindness over cunning, integrity over image. Most importantly, I learned to value myself. I'd spent 17 years believing that I was worth less than Maya, that her needs and wants were more important than mine. I'd accepted scraps of love and attention, grateful for any acknowledgement from my family, but I was worth more than that. I deserved better than that. And now, finally, I had it. Sometimes, late at night in my beautiful penthouse apartment, I wondered what would have happened if I'd used my rebirth differently. What if I'd tried to save Maya instead of destroying her? What if I'd focused on healing our family rather than exposing its dysfunction? But then I remembered the look in her eyes as she'd pushed me to my death, the cold satisfaction as she'd checked to make sure I was gone. Some people couldn't be saved, couldn't be redeemed, couldn't be loved into becoming better versions of themselves. Maya was one of those people. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. The lottery drawing that had started everything seemed almost insignificant now, a mere footnote in the larger story of justice finally being served. Maya had laughed when she'd corrected my supposedly wrong numbers, convinced that she was fixing my incompetence while positioning herself for wealth and glory. She'd never imagined that I was playing a completely different game, with rules she didn't understand and stakes she couldn't comprehend. She'd thought she was the smart one, the strategic one, the one who understood how the world really worked. But she'd been wrong about everything. In the end, the $87 million had been the least important thing I'd won. What mattered was that I'd reclaimed my life, my power, and my future. I'd turned my greatest weakness, my trusting, forgiving nature, into my greatest strength by learning when to trust and when to protect myself. The girl who died at the bottom of those marble stairs had been a victim, powerless and alone. The woman who'd taken her place was a survivor, armed with knowledge and determination, finally in control of her own destiny. And Maya? Maya was exactly where she belonged, locked away from society, paying the price for a lifetime of cruelty, finally facing consequences she couldn't charm or manipulate her way out of. Justice, I discovered, was indeed sweeter than any lottery jackpot, and this time, I was the one who'd won it all.